Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming in on this special presentation today. My name is Akhil, and I'm the co-founder of Green Story. And welcome to the special webinar series on the new normal. The purpose of the series was to really help anyone that's in the eco-fashion space navigate and come out stronger during this period of crisis that's caused by COVID-19 and everything else that's going on in the world today. And today we'll be hearing about sustainable supply chains and fibers from Green Story's very own Anitta Toma. If you have any questions, please type them out in the question box in Zoom, and we'll get to them after the presentation. We already got a lot of questions from the registrants, so we'll be going through them as well. But if you have any other questions, there's a question box, there's a chat box, and we'll be monitoring that. And there's also going to be a discussion online. Please use the hashtag new normal or tag us at Green Story, and we'll definitely find a way to respond to you. With that said, take it away, Anita.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Glad to have you here today. And thank you, Akhil, for the introduction. Today, I want to give you an overview of sustainability in supply chains and preferred fibers. Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm the lead research and LCA analyst at Green Story. My master's is in developmental economics and international relations with a focus on sustainability from Friedrich Alexander University in Germany. It was actually in Germany that I came across Green Story, which is based in Toronto, Canada. And they weren't looking for a new team member at the time, but as soon as I saw them, I said, you know what, you guys are amazing. I love the work that you're doing, and I just have to work with you. So here we are 2 years later. So for everyone who doesn't know Green Story yet, Green Story was set up 5 years ago with the goal of getting every consumer to ask, what's my impact? As a company, we work with brands from startups to global giants to measure the impact of their supply chains and visualize this to their consumers. Here's a quick example of what we do. This is a product page, as you can see on the right side, of one of our clients, No Nasties. We have here calculated the impact of their organic cotton item, compared it to a conventional item, and showed this at the point of sale through clear and easy to understand infographics. So in this presentation, this is going to be helpful if you're a new green fashion brand looking to set up sustainable supply chains, if you're an established green fashion brand looking for additional sustainable practices, if you're a fashion brand just starting to explore the green space, or if you're a customer looking for more information in sustainable fashion. What we'll learn in this presentation is one, what to look at when tracing your supply chain. 2, sustainable alternatives to implement throughout your supply chain. 3, alternative materials that work best for your brand. So our agenda is going to be, firstly, looking at the supply chain and talking about tracing it and finding the biggest impacts. I will go into each stage of the supply chain and talk about some of the key issues, as well as the green alternatives. And then we'll go specifically into preferred fibers, and I'll highlight the 8 most common sustainable materials used on the market today. So, firstly, why is it even important to look at a supply chain? Well, in a recent study, McKinsey discovered that between 40 to 60% of a company's environmental footprint actually comes from its supply chain, this being the resources it needs and the greenhouse gases it emits. But only 23% of companies think of their footprint when choosing suppliers. As you see, it's crucial to understand your supply chain and what is causing this impact behind it. In order to find this impact, we firstly have to get full transparency of the supply chain. Now, a few key supply chain stages look like this. There's the raw material production, then the fiber creation, the yarn production, the fabric, then the cutting and sewing, and the apparel creation, and finally going to the warehouse. Now, getting this full transparency means knowing where each of the stages is, where you're producing from, so all the way from the raw material until your warehouse, who your suppliers are at each of these stages, and what their major production processes are, as well as how the materials are transported between each of these stages. Now, once you've laid this all out, the next step is to identify your biggest impacts. So, what are the major environmental issues at each of these stages? Is it the amount of water that's used? Is it the amount of energy that's required? Or the type of energy, the source of the energy that's being used here? Is it the chemicals that are used? Or is it the waste that is being produced at this stage? Now, I understand that this might seem like a giant task ahead, but remember, you don't have to spot every single detail of every process, just the main issues behind each stage. Once you've identified the biggest culprit at each stage, you realize that there are a lot of various impacts throughout the full supply chain. And as it's quite impossible to fix all of them at the exact same time, it's very important to focus on the issues that cause the most environmental problems, so-called your material issues, and also focus on the ones that are feasible for your brand to tackle first. Now, let's walk through the supply chain together and look at some of the main issues and also some sustainable alternatives. So, some crucial stages to consider when looking at the impacts are the following. Even before your supply chain comes the product design. Afterwards, there's your raw materials, there's the yarn and fabric creation, the dye house, of course, the apparel production at the cut and sew facility, and your modes of transport. So, sustainability starts even before the supply chain. And one crucial aspect as a business is looking at the product design. The design can actually cause issues or benefits for stages in your supply chain, but it also transcends that to your customers and also the product's end of life stage. The main issues in design are products that are created only for trends, they're poor quality, and they have a lot of different materials blended together so that they can't be recycled when they're disposed of. Now, our goal here is to move design away from fast fashion. And that means designing products for multiple occasions and that can be used throughout the year, making products that are made to last and that won't just be thrown away after a couple of seasons, designing products to create less waste at the cut and sew stage, and when possible, try to create garments that don't need to be dry cleaned, as this adds extra impact at the customer's end. As well, creating garments which are made to be recycled afterwards. And this means not blending in too many fibers together, especially elastane. So now, let's jump to the first stage of the supply chain, which is the raw materials. Now, depending on the product, depending on the material that you use at this stage, there will be very different impacts along your supply chain, and it all starts at the raw material stage. Conventional materials are very impactful at this stage. Cotton, for example, is an extremely thirsty crop that requires about 2,100 liters of water to make 1 kilogram of fabric. And that makes 99% of its water impact at this stage of the supply chain. It also uses about 25% of all of its energy in the supply chain at this stage. Polyester, on the other hand, requires petroleum to be extracted, and turning this into granulate chips takes about 30% of the total energy use in the supply chains. Switching to preferred fibers here is the easiest way to avoid these impacts. We will do a deep dive into sustainable materials in the second half of this presentation, so hold on tight. However, if this is not possible for you to switch materials, you can speak with your suppliers at this stage to implement rainwater harvesting programs to move away from irrigation and use more energy-efficient cultivation machinery. So, I want to stop here for a second and talk about the importance of energy grids. Depending on what country you produce in, will have very different impacts because of the source of the energy grids. If you're producing in a country like China or India, your CO2 emissions will be higher because they're based on fossil fuels. This can be up from anywhere between 2 to 3 times the amount of emissions compared to grids based on natural gas. The best alternative here is to switch to production in countries that are based on cleaner energy grids. Europe is a great alternative for that, as there's quite a bit of production in Turkey and Portugal, which is a good alternative, and North America as well. So while Canada and the United States don't have much production for knitting and weaving, Mexico would be a great alternative here. But if it's not possible for you to switch, or you're already working with amazing suppliers in these countries, talk with your suppliers or look for suppliers who are using renewable energy, and they're not just based on the country's energy grid. Also, look into keeping equipment up to date and efficient, and running on electricity, not diesel, as this will save on emissions. As well, use knitting rather than weaving. Knitting actually requires far less energy than weaving for both the yarn and the fabric production. All right, so now let's turn to dyeing. This is often the most impactful stage of the supply chain, and there are 3 main problems at this stage. Firstly, it uses a lot of water for dyeing the fabrics, but as well as for cleaning the machines. Secondly, there's a lot of water pollution if there's no recycling system put into place here. And it takes a lot of energy, not just from the actual production, but also from the manufacturing of the dyes and the chemicals, the heating, the drying, as well as the treatment of the wastewater. But there are some great alternatives, so why don't we start with the easiest ones to implement? Firstly, avoid dyeing altogether. This is especially great for cotton and organic cotton that can be grown in a variety of colors, including tan, green, red, brown, as well as yellow. And these aren't genetically modified. Also, avoid using dark colors in general, as these are generally more focused on dye chemicals and need more water. And colors to avoid here are turquoise, bright blues, Kelly greens, as these also require heavy metals. As well, go away from azo dyes that are used in about 70% of the commercial dyes on the market today. And they're used because they're cheap and they have very strong colors. But these dyes are also incredibly harmful for human health as well as the environment. Rather, switch to low-impact reactive dyes. These are free from toxic chemicals and heavy metals and require less rinsing and less water usage. Or switch to natural dyes. These are obtained from natural sources, which are mostly from plants, but also come from other sources such as insects, shellfish, and mineral compounds. So these natural dyes are also resilient to fading and are now becoming more readily available on the market. Also, check for sorry, I lost it here. Okay. Also, check for your facility processes. So aim to reduce your dye baths for several batches, or try to reduce your liquor ratios when possible. And currently on the market, we have a standard liquor ratio of about 12 to 1. That means that there's 12 liters needed for 1 kilogram. So reducing this ratio will save a lot of water in the long term. Also, check for the location of the dye house. Is the water being withdrawn from the groundwater or from surface water? Is the dye here being taken, or is the dye house being located in water scarce regions that too much surface water is being diverted in places such as India or Bangladesh? And try to work with suppliers who have a water recycling system or a closed loop system rather than needing to extract new water and to use new water for this dyeing. And lastly, look for certifications that you can trust in when choosing suppliers and materials. Some of these are examples such as the Ecotech Standard 100, the Blue Sign, and the GOTS Standard, which make sure that there's a certain environmental level standard that is reached. So let's go on to the apparel creation. This is often a stage that can be most influenced because brands work in close proximity with their suppliers, and it's highly dependent on the product design. The main issue at this stage is that there is a lot of waste. So, about 37% of fiber is lost throughout the production when creating a t-shirt, and most of it comes at this stage. This means that more fiber actually needs to be produced to make up for this waste. So here are a few ways to be able to reduce this. Firstly, reuse scraps for other items such as jewelry, headbands, and accessories. Also, try to design for minimal blends, as I was talking about before. So try to use less fiber blends in materials, as this is more likely that your scraps are able to be recycled. And of course, this goes in hand with the next point, which is collaborate with recycling facilities in the area to be able to recycle this fiber. So this material can either be recycled in a closed loop system to make new garments, or if the quality is not so good, it can be done through open loop to create furniture, carpets, and other items. And lastly, a crucial step to keep in mind is transportation. So with our global supply chains nowadays, it can't be that each step is done in a different country around the world. You can have cultivation done in the US, sent over to Asia, sent back to Europe, sent to Asia, and back to warehouse in North America. It goes all over the place. And this leads to a lot of unnecessary CO2 emissions. Usually, ship will be used throughout the supply chain, but brands will often also use air between their assembly, their cut and sew, and the warehouse. And this is very impactful. Brands will often use air transport because orders have to arrive very quickly to their warehouse, or for smaller brands, it might be that it's not even possible yet to book a ship container. But air adds about 4 to 5 kilograms of extra CO2 emissions to 1 kilogram of apparel. And that would be about 20 kilograms of CO2. So some main solutions here are using ship instead of air. Ship only adds less than half a kilogram of CO2 to your total footprint. And when possible, use train instead of truck for inland transportation when possible. Now, I understand that sometimes it might not be possible for a brand to use ship versus air. But then try having your assembly geographically closer to your warehouse as a good alternative. This is particularly important if you're a smaller brand and can't yet book container ships. And also try to have as much of your supply chain as close as possible to your warehouse to avoid unnecessary worldwide travel. And lastly, work with suppliers that have vertically integrated facilities. This is when multiple processes of the supply chain are done inside one facility. If this is not possible, at least aim to have production done in the same country or neighboring countries. So, to quickly recap what we've learned so far, in implementing these sustainable practices throughout your supply chains, the most impactful actions that you can take are 1, to create clothing that goes away from fast fashion. 2, use ship and train whenever possible. And 3, and often the easiest step, is to switch over to sustainable fibers. So why don't we jump right in and talk about what these materials are? So the next part of this presentation, we'll look at some great alternative materials, their applications, and their eco-benefits. Some of the most popular materials on the market today are linen, tencel, recycled polyester and bamboo, cork, recycled wool, organic cotton, and hemp. So, in judging the overall fabric, we've compiled our own scoring system at Green Story to take into account some crucial elements when trying to pick a green fabric. We've judged these out of each on a category out of 5, with 1 being its lowest. So we've taken into account the amount of CO2 emissions released into the environment from cultivation up until the fabric production. And we've created a star rating by doing a life cycle assessment, including all of the resources that are needed at these stages. 5 stars here would be a fabric under 10 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram created. 4 stars is 10 to 20 kilograms, and 3 stars is 20 to 30 kilograms. Luckily, none of these materials have less than 3 stars. And one of the key points in favor of green fabrics is that they save significant amount of water compared to conventional materials. Some are better than others, of course, so we've taken this into account, with 5 stars being a fabric that needs less than 75 liters of water, 4 stars when it needs between 76 and 300 liters of water, and 3 stars up until 500 liters. And while campaigning for green being our #1 goal, we also understand that price is a big factor for brands when choosing materials. So when keeping this in mind, we've judged each fabric on its relation of cost compared to cotton, with 5 stars being almost as cheap as cotton. Also, the proximity of your production to your warehouse is an important factor, as we've seen earlier in this presentation. Therefore, we've taken a North American perspective, and we looked at how accessible sourcing this material is and whether manufacturing is possible outside of major fabric production hubs. And lastly, there is an other category. This is kind of an umbrella category where all of the pros and cons were put that didn't fit in other categories, just to give a more holistic view of the materials. So let's take a look at some materials. Firstly, we have linen. So linen is a natural and biodegradable fabric made from flax plants. It's primarily used as a substitute for cotton for shirts and dresses in summer garments. Linen's great qualities are that it's minimal use of water and its availability, which gives it 5 stars, or rather here, 5 leaves. So flax crops are highly resilient and can grow in poor soils, meaning that they need far less irrigation than other crops. This material has been around for thousands of years, and it's available worldwide, making it great for local production. Although the most yarn and the least impactful linen comes from France or Belgium. However, because it's such a sturdy plant, it's more difficult to manufacture and leads to more waste in production, resulting in slightly more emissions. This difficulty in production also leads to its downside, the cost, as it's often dubbed a luxury fabric. But it's grown without the use of toxic fertilizers and pesticides, it's very high yielding, and most brands actually decide to leave this fabric in its natural tone, without the dyeing stage. So now let's look at a slightly newer material on the market, tencel. So tencel, now called tencel lyocell, is relatively new, as it was invented by Lenzing in Austria 40 years ago. This material comes from the pulp of trees and is comparable to rayon or viscose and modal in terms of its physical characteristics. This is a fantastic fiber when it comes to water, emissions, and just an overall material. The production process is actually designed with sustainability in mind, making it highly efficient, low waste, and having minimal impact. Also, it only needs about 1/3 of the water compared to viscose, and it captures, recycles, and reuses over 99% of water and all of its non-toxic solvents that is used. Its weaker points are that it's relatively high priced because of this eco-friendly production, and it's not available as widely yet compared to other materials, or I guess other green alternatives. But tencel lyocell has great overall qualities. It's from certified and controlled forests, it uses only non-toxic chemicals, it's biodegradable and recyclable, and it has a silk-like feel, although it's more durable than cotton and linen. So let's look at another fabric, and this in the cellulosic family, just like tencel, and that is bamboo. Bamboo fabric is often used also instead of viscose or rayon. This is very popular for towels and beddings, as well as t-shirts and dresses because it's super soft. Bamboo fabric is made from the stems and leaves of moso bamboo plants, which is technically a grass, and it grows at a much quicker rate compared to any other cellulosic-based material. And because of this, it's very high yielding as well. Its pros is that it uses bamboo grass over trees, which makes it better than viscose for CO2 emissions, and it needs less water. But the rest of the process of turning it into a fabric is the exact same as rayon, which still requires chemicals and water to turn it into yarn. And so it leaves this category at 4 stars. Its core is quite low on availability because the plant is only able to grow in China and Taiwan, but price-wise, it's the same as viscose and only slightly higher than cotton. As well, it's strong, durable, and great for moisture absorption. It's pest resistant, so there's no need for pesticides or herbicides, and it's also fast growing, so it doesn't need fertilizers, although some suppliers do opt to use them. Now, let's turn towards recycling and take a look at recycled polyester. So, recycled polyester, or rPET for short, falls under the synthetic family of fabrics. It's used as a green alternative to polyester, and with very good reason. So, right now, there's more than 62 million tons of polyester produced annually. That's 49% of the global fiber production. It's made most often from post-consumer It's made most often from post-consumer plastic water bottles. There we go. And it takes about 5 bottles to create one t-shirt. If you're looking for a cheap and widely available sustainable alternative, this is a material that you'll be interested in. It's slightly more expensive than polyester, but it's on par with cotton. It has slightly less emissions than polyester because it bypasses the petroleum extracted needed to make polyester, but it only gets 3 stars because of its recycling process that needs to break down the plastic and convert it back to yarn. rPET's main benefits, though, are that it recycles plastic trash and prevents new polyester from being made. It saves 35% on water compared to polyester. But of course, it has the downside that it is a synthetic fabric, so it will release microfibers during the wash and use phase. Now, let's turn to a more natural recycled material, recycled wool. So, recycled fabrics in general are much better than new fabrics because they avoid the often most intensive part, the raw material production, as we've seen in rPET. But for wool, this means that it bypasses the most environmentally harmful stage, the sheep raising, and the scouring process, which recycled wool actually only needs to be mechanically broken down again, which releases very little emissions and needs almost no water. As well, recycled natural fibers, wool as well as recycled cotton, don't need to be re-dyed, and so it also avoids the CO2 and water impacts. Its only downside for recycled wool is that it's not available worldwide yet. It has a few specialized hubs in Italy and India, but it does well for price because it is cheaper than new garments, making it a new wool garment, making it a great way for brands to start incorporating wool into their products. So let's talk a little bit about cork. This material is not often known to be sustainable, but it is one of the least impactful materials. Cork is ultra light, ultra durable, and it's used as a leather alternative for accessories like bags and wallets, and also for shoes. It's made from the bark of trees without cutting them down, which actually makes the tree absorb 2 to 3 times more CO2 compared to non-harvested trees. It also does well on water, but it is still used a little bit for processing the bark, so it does leave it at 4 stars. Its only downsides are that it's not as available because it is only grown in the Western Mediterranean area and the Iberian Peninsula, making it a little bit more pricey. But it is worth it because it does great in the other category. It's waterproof, hypoallergenic, it's recyclable and fully traceable, and it has virtually no waste. As well, it is completely toxic-free, even in its sealant and dyeing. And so now, let's talk a bit about organic cotton. So organic cotton is the most widely known eco-fabric used on the market today. It's great because it has all the characteristics from cotton, but it leaves out all of the pesticides and intensive water usage. It releases 46% less CO2 emissions than cotton and also uses about 85% less irrigation water compared to cotton. But this also, of course, depends on the region. So there are some countries that use a little bit more irrigation for their organic cotton, while others only use rain-fed water. It also scores well in terms of price, as it's relatively cheaper compared to other sustainable alternatives, although it is slightly more expensive than cotton because the cultivation has a lower yield, as well as organic cotton should be certified, so everyone knows that it's organic cotton. However, it is widely available. It's available on every continent in 35 different countries, making it great also for local production. And now to switch to our last material, hemp. This fabric has been used for thousands of years, and it's made from cannabis sativa fiber, otherwise known as industrial hemp. It's used in anything from towels, kitchen linens, as well as apparel like t-shirts, dresses, and hoodies. It's a bit of a tougher material, but it's often blended with organic cotton to soften it up. Hemp is a very quick growing crop. It's actually much faster growing than weeds, and it doesn't require much irrigation water. But it doesn't get a full 5 stars or leaves here because of its degumming process, which does require some water. Also, this degumming process is also the reason why it has a lower score on CO2 emissions. Hemp's best traits, though, are its overall physical properties and characteristics. And that is that it's the strongest natural fiber after spider silk. And it's the best natural fiber for antibacterial properties, making it great for bedding and towels. As well, it's a natural CO2 sink, which removes more CO2 per hectare than any forest or other commercial crop. Unfortunately, most countries are still very strict on growing it, but it's not, and for this reason, I guess it's not also available in very many countries, making it more expensive. But if you do opt for this material, it is often can be blended with organic cotton to bring down the cost and also make it a little bit more workable. And so now that I've gone through some of the most popular alternatives on the market, deciding which material works best for your brand also depends on a couple different things. And that is, what are your material needs? What type of garment are you producing? A bathing suit company will require very different materials, of course, than a bedding company. As well, where are you located? Based on your warehouse and customers, what materials make sense for you to be in closer proximity with? And lastly, which impacts are you trying to tackle? As we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, your switch towards sustainable fabric should also be tackling some of the main issues you currently have in your supply chain. So here are the 3 big takeaways. Firstly, trace your supply chains. Secondly, find out where your biggest impacts are within your supply chain. And third, switch to sustainable alternatives for your material issues. There are a few sources that can help you with this, and I've listed here a few of them. Firstly, turn towards the Higg Material Sustainability Index for getting an overview of your impacts throughout your supply chain. As well, check out Textile Exchange for finding reliable sourcing and suppliers. And also make sure to check out Green Story's own ebooks for more in-depth look at topics such as this one. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation.
Right. Well, thank you, Anita. That is a wonderful presentation. And we have had a few questions come in from the registrants as well as people online here. So
Okay.
we can go through a few of them. I think we
Sure.
might have space to maybe answer 5 or 6 today. And for the rest that we won't be getting to today, because we do have a lot of questions that have come in, we'll be doing this online as well. So no question will be missed. So,
Sounds good.
okay. So the first one that came out was, how to complete the components of a LCA, or life cycle analysis, without the upfront cost. Like traditionally, and this to lay some context for the attendees, LCA analysis has been quite expensive because you're charged per hour by a consulting agency to do something, and a typical minor LCA might cost anywhere upwards of $10,000. So what's the alternative here if you really want the numbers?
Yes, for sure. I mean, so a great place to actually start with is looking at the Higg Material Sustainability Index that I've also noted in the presentation. And this is great for understanding what impacts are without in different parts of the supply chain. And this tool that they have is also great because it allows for brands or for suppliers to plug in specific production details that they might be using to see this impact. Now, if brands do want to take a closer look, this information that they have in there is actually linked to other sources like peer-reviewed journals and other life cycle assessment studies that have been done. So this is another great way to find out the actual footprint behind it. And it will be a bit more technical, talking about technical terms, but if you're looking for that, make sure to check out these articles as well. And of course, as well, check out Green Story. With using our own platform, there is very little upfront cost on the actual analysis that goes behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to put a shameless plug here, but it basically is a software as a service system, which has very little upfront cost. And that's a great idea on the universities. There's lots of research agreements as well. And what I'm finding now is more and more universities are more willing to come in and partner with brands because LCA and data analysis becomes such a big thing. And a lot of students are interested in that. So that's also an alternative. Okay, and here's another one. What about the new fibers? Hemp and bamboo are definitely grown in popularity, and there are, issues with all of them, of course, here and there. But it's definitely cut above, say, conventional cotton, and there's been a lot of increase in popularity. And there's also like the new fibers that have come in, like Pineatex, all these other ones. So what's your take on these new fibers, and how do you see the kind of the future adoption of them?
Yeah. So I actually just saw a report put out from Textile Exchange that gave an overview on this, and it was their 2018 report, but it was saying that even back then the fibers were growing in number and market share. And also there's a lot more initiatives coming to the market, as you were saying. So a lot of bio-based polyester, bio-based nylon, and also new production processes from suppliers that are more environmentally friendly. And of course, they're not as big as conventional, but they are growing. So we are seeing a very good increase here. And yeah.
What's the data behind it? Are these new fibers well studied yet, or is it still something that up in the air? It's a work in progress, kind of.
No, they do. Yes. Well, a lot of these suppliers that have created these processes actually create them to be able to be more sustainable, with sustainability in mind, like Lensing has done. So they have had LCAs or environmental product declarations done about them that can be found. Not all of them can be found, but there are studies out there about this showing how much better they are and why they are saving these impacts.
Right. And one thing that's the issue right now is like some of the sustainable fibers we mentioned, or like I'd say the more sustainable fibers we
Mhm.
mentioned was, say, recycled polyester and other synthetic ones. And an issue with that is like the end of life textile waste.
Mhm.
So would transitioning to biodegradable textiles be like an option for this for everyone? Like and if so, how do you best do that?
Mhm. Yeah, of course. So there is a giant problem right now with textile waste that we're seeing. But yeah, as you're saying, the problem is that not all textiles are biodegradable. And even a lot of textiles, man-made textiles, actually, like viscose or even eco-alternative like bamboo, they come from a natural source like bamboo grass or wood, but because they're processed with chemicals, it makes them not biodegradable. And to be able to change this, it would be great to have more focus on these companies like Lensing that are creating new ways of creating this material. So instead of the viscous process, they use the lyocell process, which doesn't require these chemicals and it makes the material biodegradable. So in this case, it would be great to focus on innovation, but as you're saying, yeah, not all of them are biodegradable, and we also have recycled polyester and polyester in general that cannot be recycled. So in this case, it would be great to look at recycling these more. And as I was saying also in the presentation, to not have materials blended because this increases the ability for them to be recycled.
Right.
For example, for polyester, if a material is made from 100% only polyester, it can be recycled several times before it actually starts losing its quality.
Right. So what you're saying
Mm.
is things like, say, Tencel for now, or like lyocell products like bamboo lyocell, they're not biodegradable per se right now because of the chemical processing that's being done.
So viscous, so the viscous process rayon, right now it is not biodegradable, also the same as bamboo that is created with the viscous process. So
Okay.
bamboo can actually be created in two ways. One that is more sustainable than the other. Bamboo created with viscous, which is most of the bamboo out there right now, is created with the same conventional process that uses these harsh chemicals and so makes it not be able to biodegrade. But bamboo is also able to be made with the lyocell process. And if this process is used, it is able to biodegrade because the solvents used here are non-toxic.
Right. So
Mhm.
if that's the case, even like Tencel lyocell, which uses the lyocell process,
Mhm.
that makes it biodegradable as well because of the solvents that are used are
Yes,
non-toxic, as you said. Wonderful.
exactly.
Okay,
Mhm.
so I mean, this is a question that's come up quite a lot, and I think it's not just about brands; it's for consumers as well. What are some of the ways to identify a brand as being sustainable apart from, the organic and fair trade certifications that they might have?
Yeah,
It's a
that
tough one.
is, yeah, that's a great question. I'm happy this came up here now because this is a very difficult question to tackle, mostly because a lot of brands will also engage in something called greenwashing, which is when a company claims that they're more environmentally friendly than they really are. For anyone who hasn't heard about greenwashing or wants to know more, we do have an ebook about this on the Green Story website if you want to check this out. Um, but to go back to this question of how to check if brands are more sustainable, there's a couple ways to do this. So, firstly, I would say to look at how much sustainability is embedded in their brand. So, for example, is it part of their mission and vision? Is it on different product pages or different pages of their website? So, it's not just here's our products and sustainability is something that we have in a report at the end in the depths of our website that people have to scroll forever to find, but that you can see that sustainability is part of everything they do. It's part of their story, it's part of their materials, of course, it's part of their business practices and everything they do.
So it's complicated. Basically, you do have to
So
check a little
complicated.
bit. It's not like, that there is an authority right now that's able to tell
Mhm.
in an easy enough way. So I think, like, the way I think about it is, you just have to be alert, and you have to
Mhm.
ask the right questions and really kind of dig in. Unfortunately, it's not easy right now to figure out if a
Yeah.
company is truly being sustainable. There's so many ones that are just kind of jumping on the bandwagon because they're saying like organic means increased sales.
Mhm.
So yeah, be alert, keep an eye out for the numbers, and
Mhm.
really look to see if their vision, everything they've been talking about for the last since their inception, has been around sustainability. That's always a
Exactly.
good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I
There's
think we have.
also, oh,
Sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add one or a couple more things to this point because I do think there's a lot that goes on here. And that is also, if you're looking to find this, also just check out how transparent a brand is about this. And of course, no brand is perfect, but the more that a brand talks about these things and shows their weaknesses and their strengths, the better actually they are. And Patagonia had an amazing example of this, where in one of their blogs, they showed that they try to move away from poly bags in delivering their garments. And they had videos and pictures showing their process of trying different sustainable alternatives. But in the end, they said, hey, listen, we're trying all we can, but it is affecting the quality of the products, and they weren't able to use it yet. But the fact that they show this transparency is amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't consider is use case, because like a huge chunk, I think more than half of it is in the use case, right? The
Hmm.
longer you keep and use a product, the more sustainable that product can be. Even like,
Exactly.
buying an organic cotton shirt and using it twice, versus buying a conventional cotton shirt and using it like 50 times.
Hmm.
It's probably better to go with a conventional shirt than, so the quality and how long you
Hmm.
use it definitely is a factor, and it's a bit more of a shaky factor because it has a lot to do with personal considerations and habits as well. So that's where consumer responsibility and even brand education comes a little bit into play. uh,
Exactly.
okay, I think we have time for maybe like a couple more questions. We have a few questions on BCI cotton. So I know like BCI cotton is considered a more sustainable alternative than conventional cotton, but how does it compare against like basically organic cotton, right?
Hmm. Yeah. So BCI cotton, yes, there is quite a bit of data that has come out of this, but it is much better than conventional cotton, but it actually does not compare to organic cotton. Now, organic cotton is only focused on organic fertilizers, pesticides, or not pesticides, but organic fertilizers such as cow dung and urea. And BCI cotton actually still has some chemical use, although it's not the same as conventional cotton. And so that's why, when possible, always opt for using organic versus BCI cotton.
Yeah, and I think a few things you should consider is things like yield. Organic cotton yield does fluctuate, so there might be increased emissions usage and other impacts.
Mm.
And BCI, like I know, like they are improving the standard, so hopefully it will get up there soon. But it is still a step above conventional cotton. So if you don't have
Yeah.
other alternatives, perhaps BCI is better if you need to go for cotton. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This came up. It's a pretty simple question, but it can be a complex answer. How do you find sustainable supply chains?
Yes, of course. Yeah, simple, but also quite difficult, especially when you're just starting off with this. So my answer here would be to essentially look at Textile Exchange, as they have a database that's available with reliable sources and suppliers. So check that out for sure as top thing. And then also look for what certificates suppliers have. So if you are thinking about working with a supplier, ask to see their certifications, to see their environmental standards. And another way actually to that I've come across also doing some research is that a lot of the most sustainable brands will actually be very transparent about their supply chains, and showcase the suppliers that they work with. So taking a look at these brands and what suppliers they work with can also be a great starting point.
Yeah, definitely industry organizations and networks are great. Like similar to textile exchange, a more private entity
Mhm.
is the Common Objective, for example, and there's also the Organic Cotton Accelerator, a few other institutions around the world which have really come together to get people connected with various suppliers out there. So that's definitely a good point there. Okay, I think that's about all the time that we have today. We will be going around and answering some questions. There is going to be an Instagram live as well. Anita, if you could pull up the last slide as well. I think
Oh, yes, of
just want to
course.
kind of mention on a final note. So this was, of course, the second of our panel, and I would like to thank Anita, of course, for being such a fantastic presenter. Thank you so much. And also the audience, it's such a great set of questions. You're so engaged. I really appreciate your working with us through this. And as I said, for any unanswered questions, we keep an eye out on social media. We will be getting to them, and also the other panels. So we have 4 other panels that are coming up this week, and tomorrow is probably the best panel if you really want to like go in a little bit deeper, because we mentioned textile exchange, we mentioned lensing during this panel. We actually have them on the panel tomorrow. So
Join in.
yeah, so please do join in, and they can answer a lot more of the questions as well. And the challenges of maintaining sustainable supply chain. So we'll have textile exchange, we'll have lensing. We'll also have 2 leading players in sustainable sourcing itself, the manufacturers from Mantis World from the UK, and Gallant International, which works with a lot of brands, which is from California, but they work with a lot of brands, supply chains in India. So really great set of folks to interact with. And if you haven't already registered, please do so. And the registration can be seen at the address here. So we will be elaborating on a lot of the points we discussed here on tomorrow's panel and on the upcoming panel. So yeah, please keep a lookout, and I look forward to seeing you all for the next panels. Thank you so much for listening in.
Thanks so much,
All right,
everyone.
take care.
Bye.